A few words before I begin. As I said with the children, it is good to be with you here in worship. Sharon called me actually several weeks ago about being here in worship together with you, and I know quite a bit has happened in between. And I just want you to know that she, her family, and this congregation are in my prayers at this time. Let us bow our heads in prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. One person who has impressed me every time I am with her is Nancy McGay. Nancy is a Presbyterian mission co-worker. She is now serving in the South Sudan. The times I've been with her, she was serving in Nepal. Nancy has a very quiet and gentle manner, and it challenges me. Challenges me in all my assumptions about life, about ministry, about the meaning of discipleship. I felt this particularly some 10 years ago when she was here in Michigan and she was visiting the congregation I had served. And so I took her to a Nepalese restaurant that was in Farmington Hills at the time. I've been there a couple of times, and the food, well, Nepal's between India and Tibet. The food's a mix between Indian and Chinese food. I took her there because I wanted to see if it was authentic. And you have to realize, too, there's not many Nepalese restaurants in the country. I think with that one closed, the next closest one is in Chicago. Most of them are in Colorado, interestingly enough. Well, we sat down in this kind of small dining area, and the waiter came up, who was clearly Nepalese, and she began speaking to him in his own language, and his mouth dropped. So it wasn't long before he and the cook, who was actually his father, and the owner, and I don't know who else, was all out in the dining area talking away with Nancy, and I didn't understand a word of it. But they would occasionally turn and make comments to me in English. What amazed them was not that she was an American who had been to Nepal. They'd known Americans who go there to trek, to climb Everest, to study at the university. It was where she had chosen to live, Jumla. Jumla is a 3-day hike from the nearest road. And we won't talk about how far that is from Kathmandu. And I remember the young man asking her, why choose there? Why choose there? Choices. It's a constant thing that came up with Nancy. A few years earlier, when I was serving in New Jersey, and that congregation actually sponsored her as a co-worker, we went to a Chinese buffet, and she stood there and said, too many choices. Too many choices. All of us utter those words at one time or another, but with Nancy, they had a poignancy because she had chosen a lifestyle as a Presbyterian mission co-worker, bringing health care to some of the remotest places in the earth, places that most of us would never choose to travel. In Nepal, her food choices became a variation of beans and rice. Limited choices about what to eat, but arose from one very large choice that she made about who she would serve. For most of us and most of our meals, there's too many choices. You may remember now, years ago, Alvin Toffler, in his now classic Future Shock, warned that we're in a time of peril of overchoice. We're befuddled by the choices before us, and often paralyzed by overchoice. Walk into Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, Myers. I have a friend who calls all of those stupor stores. You kind of wander around aimlessly, aisle by aisle, maybe hoping you're going to find what you came in after. There's just too many choices. And so it is Joshua addresses the tribes of Israel. He gathered them at Shechem, and And the point was to renew their covenant as he called upon them to choose today whom you will serve. Will you serve the God of Israel? Or will you serve one of or many gods, the many idols that abound around you? Joshua had led the Israelites into the promised land after the death of Moses. They had crossed the Jordan. They had fought the battle of Jericho. They had been victorious to the north and to the south, and they began to claim the land, dividing it up into tribal territories. They lived in a place, though, that had many, many choices about which God to worship. And you know, there was actually a God for every situation. There was a God for sun, a God for rain, there was one for fertility, there was one for the harvest. There were gods of ancestors, gods of this tradition and that tradition. Some of them kind of wondered, why don't we just keep them all? We'll keep the variety of brands, the varieties of styles, hedge our bets, keep our options open. You never know that a god of fertility might come in handy. But to assimilate, to keep the many, would be to have befuddling, stupefying choices. Not to decide, as we've heard, is to decide. Not to decide is to turn our back on Yahweh, the very one who had chosen them. Yahweh, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham and Sarah, of Moses, Aaron, Miriam. Their ancestors had promised to live by the covenant that God had made with them. And now the question was one of commitment for those who now followed. Choose this day whom you will serve. For not to decide is to decide. It's hard to decide because decision needs a commitment, a whole, full-hearted commitment. Joshua reminds us that serving the Lord is hard, for God is a jealous God, not jealous in the sense of envy or greed, but reminding us that our God is one who demands our wholehearted commitment, who demands a decision for God and for God alone. As confessing Christians, to choose God is to bear witness to the power of the risen Christ in our lives, is to commit ourselves to worship and to study and prayer and service with the giving of our time, our talent, and yes, as we all know, in the month of November, also our treasure. It's a choice that informs and even dictates all the other choices of our lives. We choose God. We worship God. We don't sleep in on Sunday morning, as good as it may feel. It's interesting being retired. I actually have that temptation now. But most of you have chosen not only to simply worship on Sunday, but to worship here. You're driving past many churches, many Presbyterian churches, to come and worship here at 4th Street. And we know, all of us know from our experience, the power of the gathered community in praise and in thanksgiving. And it's an incredible, incredible power. Later on, during the communion prayers, we'll be saying together the Lord's Prayer. Listen as you say the words to the many other voices around you uttering those very same ones. We pray together, and we're reminded of what is our chief purpose, the reason God created us. The answer is in the Westminster Shorter Catechism. The chief aim of humanity, to glorify God and to enjoy God forever. Glorify and enjoy God. All too often we forget that's why we're part of a church. Glorify God, enjoy God, and it leads us to places unknown. Above all, to giving thanks to God who has given us this power of choice in the first place. The God who has given us life and breath, our very being. Glorify is a recognition that we have a God who is with us and journeys with us, that is God's heart of this covenant. I will be your God, and you will be my people. In giving thanks, we make choices, other choices. As we give thanks, we give. Give of our treasure, our time, our talent. In giving thanks, we decide to hang in with this very human institution called the church. We hang in when things are going great, and we hang in when they're tough. It's about a choice we make. That is the choice that Joshua puts before us as much as it was put before the people of Israel. Today, that choice is before us. Whom will we serve? It's a choice above all other choices. Whom will we serve? It's a choice from which all the other choices of our lives follow. May it be the choice for God. The God who is our Redeemer. The God who saves us through the power of the cross. The God who leads us through all of life's journeys. The God who brings us to that place that is the promised land. Thanks be to God.